Hi, and welcome to CVS Health Live, our ongoing series that delivers timely perspectives and insights on healthcare issues that are happening right now. I'm Jessica DeMassa, and today we have a really important conversation on hand for you about suicide prevention. This month is National Suicide Prevention Month, and while we may have become a lot more comfortable talking about mental health issues as a result of the pandemic, when the topic of suicide comes up, it can still be really scary and overwhelming for a lot of us. Here to help us understand how to talk about suicide and what we can do to prevent it, especially among young people, we've got a panel of experts who are going to help us understand how we can talk about suicide and what we can do to help those who might be most at risk. Let's meet our panel. From the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, we have their Vice President of Mission Engagement, Doreen Marshall. We have Deborah Fernandez-Turner. She is the Medical Director of Behavioral Health at Aetna, a CVS Health company. And also from Aetna, a CVS Health company, we've got Sarah Miskanen. She is the Supervisor for Clinical Health Services. So welcome. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to dive into this topic, and we are going to talk a little bit about the current rates of suicide, particularly among young people. We're going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on suicide rates. But before we get there, Doreen, I'm hoping we can start with you and you can help us frame the discussion. So suicide, like I said, it's a difficult thing to talk about for many of us. And I know that there is a right way to talk about it. So can you tell us how to talk about suicide, especially, in terms of the words that we use to discuss it? Can you explain for us the right terminology that we should be bringing into this conversation in the first place?
Sure, Jessica. So when those of us that work in suicide prevention pay a lot of attention to the language we use, because what we want to do is we want to talk about suicide as a health issue and not convey any judgment or bring up a negative connotation. So when someone has made a suicide attempt, we refer to it as a suicide attempt, but we never say a failed or successful attempt. A suicide attempt is a suicide attempt. And a death by suicide, we say someone died by suicide versus committed suicide. We don't use the word committed. And the reason for that is because we're really trying to stay away from any language that might convey any sense of judgment or any negativity about suicide as a health issue.
Sarah, in 2020, the CDC reported an overall decline in suicide rates, but this decline was not across the board, across all demographic groups. Can you break down the numbers for us and tell us where we were seeing an increase in suicide rates?
Sure. Thanks, Jessica. I think this is a really important question. On some level, it's important to acknowledge that decline because it really speaks to a lot of the progress that has been made, just really in terms of targeted interventions. And I think for me, just the path to reducing that stigma around mental health treatment. However, suicide rates have been rising among young people in the United States. It's now the second leading cause of death for those between 10 and 24. I hear the age 10, that's the age of my son. And to think about such a young age to be in that risk of a suicide attempt. And a lot of this was happening even before the pandemic. So we've been seeing that alarming trend of an increase of suicide attempts among our adolescent members here at Aetna. Between the ages of 13 and 17 specifically, and to really bring this more into focus in terms of those demographics you talked about, these rises are being seen especially in Black youth and our LGBTQ youth. So the suicide death rate among Black youth is really increasing faster than really any other racial or ethnic group. With Black youth being, under 13 years being twice as likely to die by suicide as their white youth counterparts. And then just to go back to the other high-risk group that we're seeing, our LGBTQ youth, the Trevor Project that Aetna we've collaborated and partnered a lot with, they had a national survey for 2021. They do a lot of really great research. One of the statistics that they came out with was that 42% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. That's really scary. That's close to half. And that's including more than half of our transgender and non-binary youth. So, these rates, these statistics between those two high-risk groups are very, very concerning and alarming.
I mean, that's incredible. I cannot believe those statistics. Deborah, jump in here for us. Why do you think that this is the case among those two groups that Sarah pulled out in particular? Among the LGBTQ youth, 42%. And then what she had also contributed about those who are Black. I mean, what do you think it is among these two groups that's contributing to these higher rates?
Well, it's an excellent question, and I think it's one that professionals in the field have been asking for a long time. This is a trend, like Sarah was saying, this isn't a new trend. This has been going on for quite a while, and I do think the recent stressors, the pandemic, the social inequities, the challenges that are facing these populations is really significant. And we can't downplay that in any way. But I do want to talk about a few contributing factors. First of all, when school stops, right, when no one's going to school, there are certain touch points at school that are vitally important. Not just school counselors and those sort of formal mental health programs that exist in many schools. I mean, those have been on hold for the last 18 months, and they are absolutely vital. But additionally, even those informal things like teachers who may notice that something's off with a student, or peers that support an LGBT youth where maybe parents are not as supportive in that way. And so losing out on those, for example, school programs that support LGBT youth, for those youth who are questioning and are not able to have those questioning discussions at home because they're not comfortable talking to their family about it yet. And losing that opportunity for those teachers and those coaches to, pass somebody in a hall and give them a really positive word, those are really significant losses that I think have been a very challenging impact, especially for these populations who really rely on that school connection to be a significant part of their life. And that's for, individuals who are maybe experiencing poverty. School is a significant help for them, for support, for food, for social connections, as well as for mental health resources. So losing those are a significant issue that hopefully we'll be able to address going forward.
Doreen, I want to come to you next. So I think it's really interesting how Deborah just talked about some of the things that were lost to the young people, in terms of what they received outside of the home from school as a result of the pandemic. Those things, that part of their support network went away. But at the same time, we're seeing an overall decrease in the number of suicides. So Doreen, how do you explain that, the overall decline of suicide rates despite the pandemic?
Well, that's a great question. And I do think one thing we have to remember is this is not a one size fits all. So when we say the overall rate went down, really what we're talking about is kind of this across all age groups. We do this what's called an age adjusted rate. So we look at the suicide rate per 100,000 people accounting for age. And so when you look at the larger population, we do see a slight downward trend. Based on the data we have so far for 2020. But it's important to remember this is kind of a continuing of a slight downward trend. But again, once you dig into that data and look at individual groups, age groups, racial ethnic groups, we did see an overall downward trend for everybody. So that's important to remember as well. And I know sometimes, people wonder well, how could there possibly be a downward trend in any group with everything that's happened? And the best we know, and this is really speculative, that in times of national crisis, what tends to happen is people kind of pull together. So there's this bigger sense of connectedness people have, kind of this, we're all experiencing the same storm feeling. And that connectedness is actually protective against suicide rates. But it's important to remember that not everyone had the same experience. And when we dig into that further, we see some differences. The other piece is that, clearly this has a longer trajectory. So while we know they went down, we don't know that they will stay down. And so it's important that suicide prevention efforts, promoting crisis lines, that continues.
Deborah, Sarah, do you have anything you want to add from your perspective there? I mean, I'm curious to hear. I really think it's so curious that suicide rate overall has gone down as a result of the pandemic. Any additional factors that you want to pull out for us that Doreen didn't mention?
Yeah, I think Deborah and I were actually talking about this the other day, and one of the things that we were also discussing and just having a conversation about is that there actually were a lot of adolescents out there that, like Doreen's mentioning, like they thrived in the pandemic in the sense that they weren't in the school system. There's a lot of kids that experience bullying, or have social anxiety, all of those parts that being a part of that kind of school environment it's actually really stressful for them. And it was a nice break for them to be in a safe place, maybe their home. They kind of could, have their own sort of schedule. There was safety and comfort in that for them. And in the same sentence too, these same kids that are adolescents are returning to school this year. So, everything for them that was really safe and comfortable is now changed. So, I think again, as a whole, just really being concerned about our adolescents as they head back into that situation that had caused them stress. And even just talking about going back to school and being worried about not being caught up or not having seen their friends in over a year and what that's going to be like and navigating this really new scene for them.
These changes are really significant. So being really aware and knowing how to best support your individual family member is going to be very important, because highlighting, what Doreen said, that it really is not a one-size-fits-all approach to suicide prevention.
This is a great point to kind of zoom in on right now, because I think when it comes down to actually talking about this is a tough conversation to have. And I mean, we're talking about, with young people, but I mean, whether it's, a caregiver or a parent talking to a young person, or if it's just, two adults talking to one another. I mean, I think we may have become, like I said, more comfortable talking about our mental health as a whole during this pandemic. But when it comes to suicide, there really is a stigma still kind of wrapped around it. And I think a lot of us really feel uncomfortable. Doreen, why do you think that is? Like, what is it about talking about suicide that, just still makes us feel so uncomfortable?
Well, it's an important question, and a lot of our work at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is really about changing the conversation and empowering people to have that conversation. It's not an easy conversation, but it doesn't have to be impossible, right? So we can do this just the way we ask about other health issues. So, what I tell people all the time, and I think this is the biggest fear people have in asking directly about suicide. They're worried that if I ask someone, are you thinking of suicide, that they're somehow going to make the situation worse, or they're going to put a thought in someone's head. And nothing could be further from the truth. What we know is that when you ask someone, are you having thoughts of suicide, and they're struggling, they feel seen. They feel that you understand their struggle, that you see the pain that they're in. And so we really empower people, to ask directly. If your gut tells you you're worried about someone, or you're wondering if they've had thoughts of suicide, it's okay to ask. And, one of the ways I tell people to ask is you might just say something like, with everything that's going on right now, I'm wondering how you're doing. Sometimes when people feel overwhelmed, they may have thoughts of suicide or wanting to end their life. I'm wondering if you've ever had those kind of thoughts. Are you having them now? Just really kind of bringing it up as part of the conversation. And then I think it's important to listen, to, not react with alarm, but to know that this is something that the person has probably been struggling with in silence. So ask directly, trust your gut, but then also listen and reassure them that you can connect them to help, That's what's so important here, to listen and to reassure them that help is out there and that there's hope out there.
I love that. You did a beautiful job too, because I was going to ask you, do you just come right out and ask, or do you how do you put that into a conversation? But I think the way that you kind of wrap that up in the kind of a bigger picture kind of way, and talking about, it is challenging, and kind of creating that bond between you and the person that you're asking. I think that's really important. And like you said, they just want to feel seen and heard. And so I think that that's really a great point. And I also love what you said too about just asking like any other health issue. I think we don't think about it that way. And that actually made me feel a little bit better. It's not quite so inappropriate to ask about that. You'd ask if somebody had a tummy ache, how they were feeling.
Let me offer one more thing, I would say, particularly with young people. I think this is important. I'm the parent of 2 school-aged kids, and I know sometimes they might be doing their own thing, and we may not, know what's going on with them. I think it's important to notice changes in behavior, and that's an easy way to bring it up too. I notice you've been spending a lot of time alone. I notice you don't seem as interested in the things you used to enjoy. Sometimes when people feel that way, they may be having thoughts that it's not worth it, or even thoughts of ending their life. I think asking them, and also asking them who they're worried about in their friend network, is really important. We know that kids talk to one another long before they bring problems to adults. So, empowering them to also talk about what's going on with their friends is another way we can help advance prevention efforts.
I love that. And Doreen, you bring up a good point. What are some of the risk factors that we should be looking for? So you mentioned a couple there. It's like they're not doing the things that they used to do, or they've lost interest in certain things. What else? Deborah, kick us off. What are some of the other risk factors that we should keep an eye out for that might indicate somebody might be having suicidal thoughts?
Honestly, I think the most important thing, I really want to highlight something that Doreen just said, which is if you see a change, right? Your children, your loved ones, your partners, your siblings, your parents, your friends. If you notice something that is not quite right, and something in your gut is telling you that something is off, ask the questions. What's going on? How can I help you? Have you had these thoughts? Honestly, let's say someone isn't having thoughts about harming themselves, the fact that you have cared enough to ask can really mean the world to somebody who might be struggling. So anytime you notice any change in mood, behavior that's significant and doesn't go away after a couple of days, reach out and ask those questions.
All right, Sarah, what would you add to that? I'm taking all the risk factors I can get.
Well, I love the idea, and I'm a big go with your gut, right? Trust your instinct. Think about it that you're the only one that's maybe noticing, or that's gonna reach out, and how important that person is to you. So again, if you're seeing things that are really out of the ordinary, or they aren't all of a sudden texting all the time like maybe they would be, or responding to something on social media when that would be something they would normally do, just all of those sort of things that you're like, something doesn't seem right here. I'm just gonna reach out and say, hey, I'm thinking about you, is everything okay? I think just to kind of sum that up a little bit, but definitely always trust your instincts about those that you're close to and you care about.
This is tough for us, I think, who might be the people in that role of I feel like something might be wrong. But you ladies are all qualified mental health professionals, not a qualified mental health professional. And I think for a lot of us, we feel am I really the right person to be bringing this up? Should I not go and get help from somebody else? Sarah, kick us off there. How does the average person, the mom, the dad, the parent, the friend, the wife, the husband, feel empowered to have this kind of conversation when it does seem like it might be over our head in terms of what we know?
Sure. And that's totally valid, right? I think when you're thinking about suicide or mental health challenges, I'm not qualified. That totally is a valid feeling to be feeling when it comes to these things. And, again, like Doreen said, it's a sensitive topic and it can be really scary to approach when you think about it. But there's really no special qualifications beyond being someone who cares about your friend, your sibling, your partner, colleague, whoever it might be. And I think people are always afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing, right? And again, valid concern. We're talking about suicide, wanting to end your life, and again, totally scary. But the right person, again, is anyone who cares, and that caring person doesn't have to have all the answers, right? And just to kind of call something out here, at Aetna, we've partnered with AFSP to bring their suicide prevention training, Talk Saves Lives, to our own colleagues and our own external plan sponsors. And one of my favorite parts about the training is towards the end, when we're talking about, that support and how do you do that? How do you support somebody? And we ask everyone to take out your phone, right? And this would be a great time for anyone listening, take out your phone, and to add in the suicide prevention lifeline and the crisis text line in your contacts. The lifeline number 1-800-273-TALK, and the crisis text line where you can text TALK to 741-741. And there's trained counselors on those lines who can even help, you, Jessica, be able to have that conversation with someone that you care about. And again, for someone who is in crisis and needs someone, those are two great resources to have available.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing that, Sarah. That sounds like an incredible resource. So is that all right, I want to transition into action mode here. If we are ever called upon in our lives to play this role of somebody who steps in and offers help. Doreen, what's the very first thing we should do? Do we instantly go to those phone numbers that Sarah mentioned? Do we just ask, what's the first step, the very first thing to do when we think that somebody that we love might be at risk here?
Well, I think the first thing, like we've said, is to trust your gut, to not kind of try to explain away what you're seeing. If, I tell people, if you're worried about someone as you're hearing what we're talking about today, chances are pretty good you have something to be worried about. So I think the first thing is to tune in. And I did want to add quickly a couple more things to look for or to listen for. So one of the things we talk about at AFSP is how kind of these signs fall into three categories: talk, behavior, and mood. So what you want to do is you want to listen for talk that indicates lots of hopelessness. Sometimes people will mention suicide specifically or say, I should just end my life. Sometimes it will be more of a, there's no hope, I don't want to go on, I don't see any purpose. But to really listen to those statements and to take them seriously, even if they're made in an offhanded way. And so you can respond to that by saying, I heard what you just said and I care about you and I'm concerned, and to really dig in a little bit. So the first thing is to trust your gut. And that also means looking at behavior and mood changes, which we've kind of talked about too. Somebody who's usually pretty calm suddenly is very agitated, or someone who's usually, pretty connected and extroverted is suddenly withdrawing. Those things we really want to pay attention to. But I think the first thing is to tune in, to pay attention, to certainly, approach the person or raise the topic, and you can kind of anchor it in the context of what's going on, what you're noticing, or what you're experiencing. You can even say, this has been a really tough time for me. I've been wondering how you're doing too. But you want to ask directly about suicide, because I think what happens is a lot of times we ask people, how are you doing? How are you feeling? But we never get to that question. And what we know is the real way to open up the communication is to ask that directly. Are you having thoughts of ending your life? Are you thinking about suicide?
Okay. Deborah, shape this advice for us, for parents, caregivers, educators, people who might be working directly with that young population that is at greater risk based on the statistics that we heard earlier.
Right, absolutely. First I want to back up just a little bit in that, so even for those that we may perceive not at higher risk, it's really important to create an open dialogue within your home and within your classroom, within your school, to talk about mental well-being in an age-appropriate manner. And for some, it really is something like what Doreen was just saying, which is, I'm not feeling great today. I'm going to do something to take care of myself. And to be that role model for especially your younger kids, to show that talking about anxiety and talking about mental well-being is a really healthy, good, and important thing to do. Be that model as you're taking care of yourself. The next, I'd say to ask those very specific questions, as we've each been saying, asking specifically about mental health, about mental well-being, again, like we said, like it's a cold, like it's a stomach ache, and normalizing that conversation. And then, of course, asking specifically about suicide when you need to. And don't be afraid to ask the question. Another way that you can let it be known that you're someone who is a support is if you have an Instagram or a Facebook account, you can post the phone numbers for the Suicide Prevention Line, the Trevor Project, the Human Rights Campaign, any of those sorts of sites, or Centrelink, any of those sorts of sites that show that you're an ally, can let people know that you're someone that they can come to and speak to. So that's all really important and can be really helpful for someone. Let's say you have your child has a friend that may be really struggling. If you're posting those things, or you have those things, or you're talking about those things in your home, you could be a safe person for them to come to as well. The other thing to know is to not wait. If you're hearing any concerns, if you ask the question and maybe you don't get quite an answer, make sure that your kids have those hotline numbers, whether it's the suicide prevention number, the text line, the Trevor Project, any of those, and encourage them. Let them know this is there for you. This is here for you to use. And I'm not going to judge that, and that's really important to do. Next, use the resources that you have, like talking to your primary care doctor, use your EAP, call your insurance company, look for their website, and find a therapist. And I would love to see families across the country normalize going to therapy and normalize going to family therapy, and just have that be part of what happens, in the same way that, you wouldn't think twice about going to see an ear, nose, and throat doctor for chronic ear infections.
I love this, and I think I love what you're saying too about normalizing this in the household, because it's almost like practicing like good health hygiene, like by brushing your teeth every day, or by going to the doctor for your annual checkup or whatever, or getting your flu shot, those kinds of things. I mean, having those good mental health practices there all along really kind of helps build that base, is what it sounds like to me. All right, Sarah, so we've heard a lot of good resources tossed out there. You got us with those 800 numbers earlier in the conversation, but what else is out there? Like, what other resources can you point us toward? I mean, there's got to be a wealth of them, but which ones do you like?
Sure. So, I mean, as a CVS Health employee, I mean, we have a great site that you can go to on cvshealth.com. Where we now have our suicide prevention page. And on there are a wealth of resources, a wealth of information. We've developed a suicide prevention task force here that's led by our fearless leader, Flora Vivalvo, we've really been hard at work to meet this bold goal of reducing suicide attempts by 20% among our Aetna members by 2025. So we've adapted that from a lot of different organizations out there, like AFSP. So on that site, you can find information about 2 resources that we created for youth and for caregivers. There's 2 guidebooks there. That's really a resource guide, and within those 2 guidebooks are resources like the Trevor Project, like the Crisis Text Line, like AFSP. They're all listed in there, and it's really about, like we've been talking about, having those conversations, what warning signs to look for. Again, on our site, you can find referral and contact information for some of really high quality outpatient programs that we've been working with that are focused on reducing suicide risk, like We Health and DD Hirsch, that has a peer support group, which is really important. Again, the Trevor Project's on there, one of our leading national organizations that provides crisis intervention and suicide prevention services to our LGBTQ young people under the age of 25. Same site. Go on there. We have information about our suicide prevention certification program for practitioners that's in partnership with Psych Hub. And something I feel really proud of too is that we had a really awesome social media campaign through our summer months that viewers can still go and check out on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, that really focused on a lot of resources and raising awareness for LGBTQ and our BIPOC youth, our two very high risk adolescent groups there. So again, lots of information that you can find on our site at cvshealth.com.
Awesome. And Deborah, what would you add to that? I see you having a good resource that you need to contribute.
Yeah, so I do want to remind everybody that CVS Health really has decided that mental health is health, like Sarah said. It's a very exciting thing because I think it does sort of change the paradigm that mental health is part of your regular health, and it is equally important, and accessibility is vitally important. So if you don't have access to the Minute Clinic and the therapist there, then don't forget to call your EAP, whether it's with CVS Health, Aetna, or with another insurance company, because they can help you pretty quickly to get the services that you need, and even provide a couple of sessions to get you started. So those are great ways to get help and care fast.
Okay. And Doreen, what would you add to that? The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, I'm sure, has a wealth of resources also. So give us the highlights.
We absolutely do. And so AFSP.org, for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.org. We have Real Convo Guides, which is basically a set of tools and resources on how to have these conversations and how to ask about mental health and suicide. We have a number of resources that talk about young people and what you can do if you're someone supporting a young person, as well as resources for people who have been impacted by a suicide death. Lots of resources on our website, and I would just encourage you to follow us on social media as well. We're putting out lots of resources daily that will help both have the conversation but also understand suicide prevention and what you can do about it.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for all of this information. It's like, I've got like so many key takeaways. It's like, I am the right person to have this conversation, and I actually genuinely might believe it now. It's like, I've got a good framework for how to start out. I've got resources that I can send people to. I mean, I think like, thank you so much for all of this information. I mean, it definitely helps to have a conversation about this to kind of remove that stigma that we mentioned at the top. And I definitely feel like just talking through and really hearing your perspectives from your professional roles and having to have these conversations regularly, getting your best advice is definitely very impactful. So thank you so much for stopping by and sharing that with us here. Doreen Marshall, the Vice President of Mission Engagement at American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Deborah Fernandez-Turner, the Medical Director for Behavioral Health at Aetna, a CVS Health company, and Sarah Miskanen, Supervisor for Clinical Health Services, also at Aetna. Thank you so much for joining us again. I'm Jessica DeMassa, and thank you to all of you for watching CVS Health Live. For all of those resources that these ladies mentioned, or at least a good collection of them, including that very robust CVS Health page, check out the cvshealth.com website listed here, and then those resources will also be published alongside this video, so you can check those out there too. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.